All right, we're going to look at the end of the very difficult chapter of Ezehu Neshech. I want to focus on an idea that was brought up on Daf Ayin Hey, which is last week's Daf. If toward the end of the Mishnah on Daf Ayin Hey Amud Beis, we're about 5 or 6 lines before the end of the Mishnah. Okay, and we had this mentioned actually a few times throughout the Perek. Okay, it was a very, very difficult chapter to learn. And it ends off by discussing the severity of ribis. It talks about all of the parties that are guilty when one, in fact, lends with ribis. So the Mishnah ends off by saying, the elu over and below taseh. Okay, basically, there's many parties to this ribis contract, and there's many prohibitions. So the way the chips line up are hamalve, v'halove, v'ha'arev, v'ha'edim. Okay? The Mishnah says that the malve, love, arev, and edim, the arev is the cosigner, and the edim, everyone is involved. They all are needed for the transaction, so therefore they all are guilty of the lo taseh. V'chachamim overim, af hasofer overim, even the sofer is over mishum lo titain, umishum al tikach me'ito, umishum lo tia lo kenosha, umishum lo tasimon alav neshech, umishum lifnei eiver lo titan michshal v'reitim lakach ani Hashem. So the chachamim say even the sofer, right, who is least likely included in this, he also gets caught up in the act, and he is also involved. Okay, so it's very specific that only certain people get lumped into certain categories. Okay, I want to look at the Tosfos. The Tosfos on the right says that according to the Tanakama of the Mishnah, it said that only the malve and love are over the lav. Okay, Tosfos on the right says are ve'edim ein overim ela mishum bal tesimun. Right, Tosfos says, I think this is actually part of the Gemara, but either way, the Gemara says that the arev and the edim are, even though they took part in the loan, they're not as stringent as the malve and love. So therefore, they only are over on bal tesimun. Okay, they got the assist. Says Tosfos on the top right-hand corner, Zimnin da avriname lifnei eiver lo seitan michshal. The truth is, the Arev and the Edim, depending on the situation, will also be over on lifnei eiver. Kagon shelo hayamalva below Arev, the Edim. Where would be an example where if they wanted to set up a loan and the only person in town to be the Arev was this person. So therefore, he assisted in the transgression of ribis. So therefore, we say that he's also over. Avalot simun psikole. Okay, to see the lav of lo simun is definite. Avalifne iver zimnin delo avri kigon shahaya malva lo belav hachi. Okay, and Tosfos is going to talk about what we're going to talk about, that when it comes to lifnei eiver, depending on the situation, okay, as Tosfos says, kihechi demochit kos shel nazir lenazir lo aver elahechi dekai b'trei avre denahara. Depending on the situation, the arev and the edim may wiggle out of the prohibition of lifnei eiver, depending on if they're the only game in town. If they're not the only game in town, then the malve and lova could have gone to any arev or edim to witness and to finalize the loan. So therefore, Tosfos makes that very important point. Now, the end of the Tosfos brings down this discussion of moshit kos shel nazir, shel yain lenazir. So Tosfos is referring to a case in the Gemara in Avodah Zarah. Okay, any topic where lifnei eiver is discussed, it's very important. It's very important that the Gemara in Avodah Zarah be brought up, because that really sets the rules and regulations of lifnei eiver. Okay, so if you open up a Gemara, Avodah Zarah Daf Vav, let's look at it together, because this is the source, and sources are very important. So I am, if you have at home a Gemara Avodah Daf Vav Amud Aleph, about 8 lines from the bottom, just as an introduction as to why we're learning Maseches Avodah Zarah, because the beginning of Avodah Zarah talks about the prohibition of doing business with we'll call an akum, an idolater, 3 days before their Id. Okay, Id is, today it's an Arabic word for holiday. It comes from the Aramaic word Eid, which is a holiday. So the Mishnah says that when it comes to helping a guy or giving him reason to be happy, okay, we stay away from doing business with them, because we don't want to interfere with them and in their holidays. So you can't loans, you can't do any business transactions with a non-Jew or with an idolater 3 days before their holiday. So the Gemara wants to know, what's the reason? Okay, okay, I'm 6 or 7 lines from the bottom of Avodah Zarah Daf Vav. Gemara wants to know, what's the reason of the prohibition? So the Gemara says, Mishum Harvacha, okay, meaning because we don't want the non-Jew to be marviach, to profit from you, from the Jewish person. And as Rashi says, Va'azil umod al avodas kochavim va'avar Yisrael mishum lo yishama al picha. The problem with doing business with an idolater 3 days before their holiday is that you will cause the non-Jew to make profit. He will then be supposedly happy, and he'll thank God, right? The problem is, it's nice to thank God, but not when you're an idolater, because an idolater will thank his God, and you're causing the non-Jew to be over the lav of Vishem Elokim Acherim Lo Tazkiru Lo Yishama Al Picha. That's a pasuk in Parshas Mishpatim, okay, which is a very, very important lo taseh, because not only do we have a prohibition of Avodah Zarah and all of its accoutrements, we also are not allowed to have any god mentioned by a non-Jew. We can't be the cause of a non-Jew or Jew saying the name of a foreign god. And when the guy thanks God for making money off of you in a business deal, you're actually causing him to do that, and that's a sin. Okay, this is a very, like I said, this happens to come into play. The Shulchan Aruch talks about the problems of having a non-Jewish partner. Okay, this is not a topic for now, just so you should know, this is the source, Lo Yishama Al Picha, is the source the Ramah brings down in the Shulchan Aruch, that if you have a non-Jewish partner, he may swear, and if he swears, he may use his name of the God. And well, if he's a Christian, it goes into the discussion of Christianity, Avodah Zarah, and all of its tentacles. We're not going to discuss that now, but this is a problem of Lo Yishama Al Picha. Okay, so that's the Gemara's first problem. Odilma, back to the Gemara, Mishum lifnei v'lo sitan michshal. Or maybe the problem is that what you're going to cause the non-Jew, right? If you sell him an animal, for example, so he's going to take that animal and he's going to bring it for Avodah Zarah, and you're going to cause him to sin, right? And that's on your tab, because you're over lifnei eiver. Rashi says that you sell the guy an animal, and he brings it for a korban, right? And obviously that's Avodah Zarah, and a Ben Noach is, right, has the prohibition of Avodah Zarah. Okay, so that's the problem possibly with doing business with a non-Jew. So the Gemara wants to know, Lamai nafkamina, why do we care? Whether it's because you're going to have the guy profit from you and he's going to be so happy he's going to thank God, or is if it a problem of lifnei eiver? So Gemara says, well, I'll tell you what the difference is. The islay behema l'didei, meaning the guy has his own animal and he's not going to use your animal. So iyamrit mishum harvacha hakamar v'chlei. So okay, so if you do business with him, then there's still a problem of harvacha because he's going to profit from you. Iyamrit mishum eiver lo siten michshal ha'isla l'didei. But if he has his own animal, right? And if I don't sell it to him, he still has his own animal, then what's the big deal? Right? He has his own animal. So there's no problem of lifnei eiver. So Gemara says, what? Just because he has his own animal, if you do business with him, you're not going to be over lifnei eiver. V'hatanya. The Gemara says, Amar Rab Nasan. And the following Gemara is what our Tosfos in Bava Metzia brought down. Minayin shelo yoshit adam kos shel yayin lenazir ve'ever min achai lebnei Noach. How do you know that you're not allowed to literally stretch your hand out and give wine to a nazir, or eiver min achai to a ben Noach? Okay, they're equal, at least for now, in that the nazir is prohibited from drinking, and never and a ben Noach is not allowed to eat eiver min hachai, right? That's one of the big seven. Okay, that's the first one. That's the aleph of the seven of the sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach. So you're not allowed to do that. Talmud lomar lifnei eiver lo siten michshal. V'hahacha, the Gemara says the chilo yahavinan le shakli la'ihu. Gemara says, and even if you don't give it to them, right? Right? If I don't give it to them, they still have their own way of obtaining it. And even if they still have their own way of obtaining it, then you're still over lifnei eiver lo siten michshal. So either way, the Gemara says, how could you tell me that when it comes to supplying the non-Jew with an animal, we said before that it doesn't really matter, right? That if you, I'm sorry, that if the non-Jew has his own animal, right? Then we said that it's not a problem. We said here too, it doesn't matter, right? Whether or not v'ha'acha, right? Still, right? Still, even if you give it to him, right? Or even if you don't give it to him, he still has his own way of obtaining it. So the Gemara says, which one is it? So the Gemara answers, Hachav Mayaskina Dekai Betray Avri Dinahar. No. You don't understand the case of the Nazir. The case of the Nazir is that the Nazir has no other way of obtaining the wine. And the Ben Noach has no other way of obtaining the Eiver Min Hachai. So that is the Brisa, when the Brisa says that you're over lifnei eiver, you're assisting him in sinning only if he has no other way of obtaining it. So what you're doing is you're enabling him, okay, that's the key word over here, you're enabling him to sin because without you providing, he has no other way of getting the thing that is us. Okay, so that is what Tosfos, getting back to Bava Metzia, is referring to, just like the prohibition of lifnei eiver is only when the malva and the lova can't find any edim, right? But if there's many edim, then the aid does not over the prohibition of lo tasimu and alav nashech, because he could say, if he didn't go to me, then he could go to someone else. Okay, or as we say today, it was going to happen anyway, right? That happens to be a very big, kula that people say today when they just say, what's the difference? He was going to do it anyway. If not me, then someone else. So this is the roots of that discussion, which is called Trei Avri Dinahara, which literally means two, right? There's two sides, and you can't, right? There's two sides of the river, and the Nazir can't get the prohibited item without you assisting him. So there's a lot to talk about. There are a lot of Rishonim that comment that comment on this Gemara, because first of all, if you look at Tosfos, Tosfos wants to know, why are we only talking about a yayin and eiver min hachai? So Tosfos on top says, Nira dehua din b'chol shar isurin, right? It applies to all isurin. It could be something not kosher. It could be shatnez if someone's going to wear it. Whatever the prohibition is, these are just examples, says Tosfos. Because what do you think he's going to do with the wine? Chances are he's going to drink it. What's unique about this is that everybody drinks wine. The only person who can't drink wine is the Nazir, right? And because the Nazir is the only one who can't drink wine, the term is, and this is what the Piskei Tosfos at the end of the Masechta, there's a commentary that brings down like the Tosfos in short, and Piskei Tosfos over here says the problem is very simple. The problem is the lo bedili mine, okay? Because a Nazir, like, is always used to drinking wine. 30 days, right? He can't drink wine. So that's something that he's not used to doing. So the problem is that if we give a Nazir yayin, right, he's used to drinking it, right? The expression is delo badal mine. He doesn't separate from it because he's used to drinking it. So therefore, he might forget. Okay, that's why we use this specific example of yayin to a Nazir. Okay, I want to read also the words of the Rush. The Rush asks Tosfos's question. He says, "Tema, my naked kos yayin lenazir ben achai lebnech tfei min adela liyisrael." So bishlam ever min achai lebnech itzrach lashmin deshayich be lifnei eiver lositen michshal. So I understand every min achai is to teach you that it also applies to a ben noach, that there's lifnei eiver to a ben noach. But why wine for a nazir? So the Rush explains, kind of like we said, he drinks it all the time, so he might forget. Right? He sees everyone else drinking wine. Maybe he'll forget. Okay. Aval, this is very important. What if someone's asking me for a nevela meat, for non-kosher meat? Okay, and I don't know what he's going to do with it. So I could actually give it to him. Right? If I'm not sure if he's going to eat it or not, I'm still allowed to give it to him. Okay, because chances are, if he's observant, right, then he's not going to eat it. Maybe he needs it to feed his animals. Okay, and he goes on to say regarding a mummer, right, someone who's an apostate. So him, that's a problem, right? And we're going to see that it depends on what you think that person's intention actually is. All right, and the Ritva also comments on that. He says. Right, when we're choshesh that they're going to misuse it. Right, if he just wants it and we don't think he's going to use it for something that's aser, then there's no lifnei eiver. But the afal pisha efsher shehu marba beisur al yadenu lo chayshin aval mikol makom itavole beferish leisur nid mishum lifnei eiver leka akati isur b'milsa mishum misaye yedei over avera. There's still another category. It may not be lifnei eiver per se, but there's a step down from lifnei eiver, which is called misayeya. Right? If you remember at the beginning of Masechah Shabbos, right? There's a concept that we learn about helping someone do an aveira. So if we don't think he's going to do it and he ends up doing it, that's called misayeya. Kol sha'anu gormin lo lasos iser, laharbis be'isser. U'kaimalan she'ein nesayin yedei Yisrael b'shvius. Okay, he gets into the discussion about Shemitah, and if you think someone is chashud on Shemitah, right, you can't help them. So we saw the source of this whole concept of lifnei eiver, and the big distinction that's made. Well, is he going to get it without me, or is the only way for him to get it is through me? And that's exactly what our Tosas and Bava Metzia made the distinction with the Arev and the Eidim. So I wanted to look at, because it's a very, very unique mitzvah, this mitzvah of lifnei eiver lo seiten michshol. The reason why it's very unique is because when you read the Sefer HaChinuch, he actually says that the mitzvah is broken down into two different categories. Okay, I am reading from 232, right? Number 232 is the Sefer HaChinuch number of lifnei eiver lo seiten michshol. So here's how he starts it off. Shelo lehachshil tam baderech. Okay, and don't make an innocent, he calls it a tam, right? Someone who's innocent. Someone who's innocent, you should not cause him to stumble. Shelo lahachshil b'nei Yisrael latet lahem eitz hara. Okay, so the first discussion is the path of giving someone an eitz hara, or what we call bad advice. Aval niyasher osam k'shiyishulu eitza. But we should give them good advice when they ask. As long as we believe that it's good advice. And he quotes the Sifra, which is what Rashi picks up on. As we're going to see, he says, Lifnei suma bedavar, v'hayanotel mimcha eitza. Right, someone who's blind in a certain direction, right? Not literally blind, but someone who doesn't know something. Don't give him advice that's not appropriate for him. Don't give someone advice and say, hey, right, sell your field and with that money buy a donkey. Okay. And 2 weeks later, he buys the donkey from him. So obviously, the only reason why you wanted him to sell the field was so that you could end up, right, profiting from this. So that's what we call an ulterior motive. Okay. It may not have been the best advice for him, but it was the best advice for you. So you implored your motive on him. Okay, that's a no-no. Okay, that is what we call lifnei eiver 1. Now, let's look at the end of the chinuch. He says, V'zeh halav kolel kumoken mi sheyazor over avera. Then there's a whole other avenue of this lav, which is called aiding and abetting, okay? Or we called before enabling, assisting someone who can't do the avera without your help, right? Remember the Nazir couldn't drink the wine if you didn't deliver it to him, okay? That's called Ya'azor over avera, shehu mevi yoso, sheis pateh bezul azel la'avar pa'amim achei remote, right? Because you bring someone to sin, right? You're like almost seducing, right, him to also be over other times. Okay, and he quotes our Gemara that we just saw in Bava Metzia, that here you have the Arev is assisting in the low taseh of Ribbis because the loan couldn't have closed without the help of the guarantor. So that's exactly the Nazir couldn't have drank the wine without you stepping in. Okay, so it sounds like a very, very innocent Minchas Chinuch. I'm sorry, Sefer HaChinuch. So I wanna focus on the Minchas Chinuch, because the Minchas Chinuch, who obviously wrote his commentary 700-800 years later on the Sefer HaChinuch actually goes to town on this introduction. And he says, L'choyre eini mevin kavanas haramach. He says, I'm not sure the kavana of the Sefer HaChinuch, shekasov b'nei Yisrael. See, we did it very, right, when you read it quickly, you don't catch what the Minchas Chinuch caught. He starts off by saying, Shlo lahachshel b'nei Yisrael. When it comes to lifnei eiver 1, okay, about bad advice, he says it's this lav is on b'nei Yisrael. At the end, he says v'zehalav kolel, when he talks about enabling, about helping, he says it's on everyone, right? So we didn't pick up on it, but the Minchas Chinuch picked up on it. And he says, I don't understand where he gets that from. He says, Eini muvan kavanas haramach, shekasav b'nei Yisrael gam la'akum halav lifnei eiver. He says, what are you talking about? This concept of bad advice goes even against non-Jews. Right? Right? He brings the Gemara before Shu b'avoda zara v'kol makom d'lo yishad avim min achai ben Noach. Right? That Gemara in avoda zara is kolel everything. It's kolel Jews. It's kolel non-Jews. So he doesn't understand for the life of him where he gets this from. And he goes on and on and on. He says, Mikol makom dafka lasiu eitza tova asar achal tzalak atzum ve'etza v'lasiu eitza ra gam le'ben Noach asar. He says, advising a ben Noach, something that's prohibited, that's also asar. Ve'ene yodeh minala le'haraf machaber b'tzarachiyun. And he ends up in a big tzarachiyun. He actually doesn't answer it. Right? Very, very interesting attack that we wouldn't pick up. So that's one of the many, many problems and issues with this lav, okay, is where he gets that from. That's the first thing. The second thing is a problem that you all should be wondering is the fact that he did not say it includes bad advice, it includes enabling someone who couldn't get it without you. But what about if you actually caused a blind man to trip, right? Why is that not part of lifnei eiver? Okay? So the Minchas Chinuch goes on, and he says, V'hinei midivrei ha-Ramach, which the Ramach is the Sefer HaChinuch, Kasav, nira de pasuk zeh, lifnei eiver yatsa lagamrei mipshuto. So he says, after I finished reading the Sefer HaChinuch, my conclusion, says the Minchas Chinuch, is that this is one of those psukim that we go out of our way to not interpret literally. What if I literally see a blind man crossing the street and I put a rock in front of him? According to the Sefer HaChinuch, what I just read, I did not commit. I may have committed, v'ahavta l'orecha kamocha, that it's right, I'm not going to win any humanitarian award. However, the question is, did I violate lifnei eiver? In the world of the Sefer HaChinuch, it sounds like you didn't, because he only talks about 2 types of lifnei eiver. He doesn't talk about the third type, which is the literal translation. He says, right? And he goes on, and then he says, V'lo yadati, he says, I don't know where he got this from. What's his problem? His problem is from the following. Kivan de mavor b'yavamos, the chol Torah kula ein mikro yotze midei pshuto chutz mepasuk vayhabachor v'haya v'kavana kasaf Ramban hainu degam pshuto nidrash. Okay, so he says he brings a proof why he's right is because the Gemara in Yevamos at the end of the second parak says in all of Torah. Okay, we're big believers. We like to darshan psukim, and sometimes the Gemara has these wild, abstract drushos. But the Gemara always says you could darshan till the cows come home, but never ever forget ein mikra yotze midei pshuto. Every single thing, every single pasuk still has its literal translation that sticks with it. Meaning we have what's called pardes, pshat, remez, drush, and sod. There's 4 different levels that we can analyze a pasuk. But the very, to get to first base is you have to understand what the literal translation is. We never, ever reject the literal translation on anything. The only exception, right, we had this a couple of years ago in Yevamos, is the concept when the pasuk says "Vayaha b'chor asher teleid," right? When it comes to when it comes to doing yibum, when you have a son, right, with the yavama, it should be named on the dead brother. And the Gemara says that is not to be taken literally. Not only that, you don't have to call him his name. What the pasuk is saying is that the nachla, the estate of the dead brother, is now inherited by the brother that takes over the marriage and marries the yavama, and it has nothing to do with literally calling the name. So says the Sefer HaChinuch, says the Minchas Chinuch, if that's true, then there's 2 exceptions. If the Sefer HaChinuch is right, that there's no prohibition at all in putting a rock in front of a blind man, then you have a second example of lifnei eiver. But because the Torah only says there's 1 example, that means that there's probably something wrong with putting a rock in front of a blind man. So that's his proof. Very, very interesting proof. And he goes on to discuss and he says, Hakavana kasav haramban hainu degam pshuto nidrash. He says, no, the Ramban disagrees with the Sefer Chinuch and says you also have to darshan the simple translation of the pasuk. Af shekama dvarim nirmaz chutz mi perizeh da'akrin. Even though we have many, many other things that we darshan, we still have to keep this alive. That the ein hamikra yotim de pshuto, and that is also included. So that's his other problem that he has with the Sefer HaChinuch. Now, when it comes to discussing this, there's one of the classic chakiras that's discussed about lifnei eiver. The reason why it's such a unique mitzvah or lo taseh is because when you enable someone to do something, you get credit. Well, it's negative credit, but you get credit in helping him. So the question is, when we tally up your checks, right? Your positives and your negatives, your mitzvahs and your averos, what do you get credited for? Do you get credited for a avera of lifnei eiver? Okay, right, someone is cold and I give him my sweater that I know has shotness. I enabled him to be over the lo taseh wearing shotness. So how does it work? Do I get the sin of lifnei eiver, or do I get the sin of half lifnei eiver and half shotness? Meaning, because I assisted in him wearing shotness, does that go on my cheshbon? Right, on my what we call scorecard in Shemayim, it's as though I wore shotness. So you're going to say, well, that's a very nice chakira, but aside, from your scorecard, why does it matter? So a possible nafkamina I heard is that when it comes to the Gemara discusses in Sanhedrin that there are what we call the big 3, avodah zarah, gilui arayos, shfichas damim. Okay, those 3 sins are what we call yoharag val yavor. How about this scenario? What if I'm over lifnei eiver on one of those? I enable somebody, or I convince someone, or I let Shimon kill Levi, right? And he wouldn't have done it without me. So I didn't kill Levi, but I convinced Shimon to kill Levi. So I'm over lifnei eiver. But am I also, now that's a bad thing. But do I get part of that thing, that avera, which is one of those 3 that I'm not allowed to do, right? and I have to give up my life. So if someone tells me, hey, convince Shimon to kill Levi, I have to give up my life because I would otherwise be liable, right? A death penalty. So therefore, do I have to give up my life if I'm just told to convince someone to commit one of the big three Averas? So that's,
Also,
you
not
know,
another nafkamina could be, what if you do the lifnei eiver, but the person doesn't end up doing the avera?
so we're going to get to that. That is a very long discussion in the Yad Malachi and in the Rav Sadia Gaon. We're going to see that actually. It's a very, very long piece. I have a few lines from it. I'm going to read it. So before we get to that, okay, there's a whole other discussion. Again, this is because of the uniqueness of this sin, there's a discussion of what if someone is going to commit a Avera Dirabanan. Okay, so and lifnei eiver is a Doraisa. So that's obviously, you could imagine the debate about whether or not I could be over a sin on a Doraisa level if he's just doing a Dirabanan, right? So I think it's Rav Yosef Engel has a whole essay. It's called Shalotia Ikar, Shalotia Tafel Chamor Min HaIkar, which basically says you can't punish somebody more than what he's causing someone else to do if that's on a lower level, right? It doesn't make sense. So there's that whole discussion also. So what Rabbi Hertzfeld just said a minute ago about the question we're all wondering is what happens, as you just said, if the person doesn't do it. So I actually found in the Sefer HaMitzvos of Rav Sadia Gaon, right? There are actually many, many Sifrei Mitzvos. The Ramban has a list of mitzvos. The Rambam does. Obviously, the Sefer HaChinuch does. Those are the more. But then there's the Smak. Then there's very many, many Rishonim that have their own. And I found Rav Sadia Gaon has his commentary also on Sefer HaMitzvos of the Rambam. And he says over here, Tzarech iyun bazeh, right? He has a very long piece. I'll read a little bit. He says, the kivan de bekraksiv lifnei eiver lo siten michshol, right? If you're medayek, it says lo titain, mashma de miyad benetinat hamichshol over belav. So if I were to translate the pasuk literally, as soon as I give, oh, good point. So let me correct myself. So this is actually his own, this is Rav Sadia Gaon's own commentary on the Minyan HaMitzvos. So because the pasuk harps on the verb giving, so as soon as I give the Nazir, we don't care what happens after that. So that's the diuk that Rav Sadia Gaon makes, to answer your question. He says, the miyad b'nesinas hamichshol over bilav. V'afal pi shelo nichshol adam bo. If the Nazir doesn't end up drinking it, if it spills, or what if I took it back? I did tshuva and I said, oh my God, and I took it right back. Right? So it sounds like because it's lotitain, then you're over on that lav. He says, Aval milashon Rabbeinu Hagaon shekasav shelo lahachshil. I don't know who the Rabbeinu Gaon that he's quoting is. I'm sorry, but he says shelo lahachshil. Then mashma l'choyre de'en hazara ela ala kishalom. So then he's like, well, maybe it's only if this actually happens, if the person actually commits the act. Okay, so he goes back and forth and back and forth. Okay. So he does bring, right? He does bring the Sefer HaChin. Well, this is actually not Rav Sadia Gaon. This is the commentary. I don't know who wrote it, so I apologize for that. And then he brings the Sefer HaChinuch who says, Shelo lahachshil. So if you're medayek, it's only if the Nazir in this example actually ends up drinking it, Then he brings Aval Bahag, Rabbi Lezer Hazaken, Vahari Al Burgulani, Vaharash Ben Gibur. He brings a whole litany of Rishonim that are on the other side of the debate. So what's one potential proof? So there's basically two Gemaras that actually prove opposite directions. He says, the heavy raya mehid parakama de kiddushin. We had this in kiddushin, right? Damrin the Rav Huna kara shirayin ba'pe Rabba. Great. Rav Huna ripped his son Rabba's favorite shirt. He was testing him, right? So how do you test your son to see if he's going to get angry, right? So today we take away his phone for a week and see how he acts, right? So then what they did was he took his shirt and he ripped it. Let me see if he gets angry or not. So the Gemara says, what? How could you do that? The Dilma Rasach, maybe he'll get angry, so we say here, it sounds like if the son would have passed the test and he didn't get angry, then there would be no lifnei eiver. Why? Because it's on. That's what it is. Thank you. Rabbi Shmuel says it's Yerachim official Perla. Okay, so he wrote this commentary that I'm quoting from now. I apologize for that. So he says that's the raya. That's the raya that he brings, is that in fact he was testing him. So if he would have passed the test, it sounds from the Gemara that he wouldn't have been over lifnei eiver because no act, right? He didn't get angry. So that's one possible Gemara. The other Gemara is a Gemara aval hevio rayas ipcha. Now we're going to bring an opposite raya from a Gemara in Moed Katan. Bahi Amsa the Rebbe. This is the famous Amma, right? The famous Amma of Rebbe, the Chazita Luhugaver, the Have Machil Bnei Gadol. She saw, right, someone hitting his son. Amra, she said, Lahi Avaga B'Shamta, right? I'm going to put you in Chayrim. Okay, the Gemara Moed Katan, if you remember, it talks about Chayrim, right? It says even if after you die, right, the Chayrim still remains, and it brought a proof from this story that the maidservant of Rebbe put this person in Chayrim, right? Because when he saw this person hit the son, right, he says, well, she said, you're going to be over lifnei eiver, because he could hit back. So it sounds like from over there, right? So it sounds like over there that you get it right away. So we have, the Tanya lifnei eiver, hare demiyad bahaka, the havile rak nesinas mechshel kaver lifnei eiver. Immediately, it sounds like you're over lifnei eiver, even though we don't know if, in fact, the son is going to strike the father back. So you could bring proofs each way, and that's a interesting lesson by itself. One thing that the Sefer HaChinuch ends, he says, what about getting malchus on this lav? So the Chinuch ends off by saying that you don't get malchus on lifnei eiver because it's a lav she'ein bo maisa, okay, which is also problematic because speaking, right, if I give someone bad advice, that's called, at least in halachic terms, lav she'ein bo maisa. I'm not doing anything physical. So the Shla actually disagrees, and he says the reason why you don't get malchus is not because it's a lav she'ein bo maisa. He says it's because it's a lav shebeklalos. Okay? He says the reason why is because lifnei eiver has so many different facets to it. It falls into the category, he says over here, he says it's like the pasuk of lo sochol al adam. The Gemara learns 6 different things from what it means lo sochol al adam. So therefore, because there's so many things you could learn from the pasuk, we don't give someone malchus. That's called a lav shebeklalos. So the Shla is of the opinion that that's the reason why you don't get malchus for it. I wanted to end the last part of the of the class with, obviously it's a serious, topic. And it has, especially today, this whole concept of forget the advice part, what we call, Sefer HaChinuch 1, more of the helping someone commit a crime. So today we call it the accomplice. And we know that, when it comes down to the law, the guy who drove the getaway car, usually gets caught up with, gets at least some jail time because, he's, the robbery couldn't have happened without the driver. So even if you don't commit the act, what we call enabling someone to commit it, is almost, all the time just as bad. So I was looking, and it's interesting that I was thinking, where is the first time, I always like to think in the, in the Chumash, sources and, first times that we see this concept. Obviously you have, Adam and Chava, but that's a very, what exactly happened. There's no classic lifnei eiver, but I saw there's a pasuk in Bereshis. It's a little bit of an obscure pasuk, from an episode in Parshas Bereshis that we don't really talk about a lot. Doesn't get much fanfare. It's the story of Lamech and his wives. Okay, so who was Lamech? Lamech was a great grandson of Cain. Okay, so the Torah says that Lamech had two wives. So I'm reading from Parshas Bereshis, chapter 4, verse 23. Vayomer Lamech lenashav, Ada v'tzila shman koli nishei Lamech hazina imrasi ki ish harakti lefitzi v'yelad b'chu barasi. Right? This is a pasuk we read every year. People don't pay attention to it. It's a very obscure story. And thank God we have Rashi to help us out about what is going on with Lamech and his two wives. Okay? So says Rashi, Shman Koli, Shahayu Parshas Mimenu Mitashmish. Okay, so what's going on? What's going on is that Lamech, okay, a descendant of Cain, had his wives one day say, we're not going to live with you anymore. Levi Shahara gets Cain, that's Tuval Cain Beno. What's the story? The story is, we know that after Cain killed his brother Hevel, he was cursed, okay? And how did he meet his end? He met his end 7 generations later from his great-grandson, Lamech. Because Lamech killed Cain, and he killed Tuval Cain, all at once, right? Again, Lamech killed his son, whose name was Tuval Cain, and he also killed Cain at the same time. What's the story? Rashi brings down, Shahaya Lemech Suma, the Tuval Cain Moshcha. Because Lamech was blind, okay, interesting, the Tuval Cain Moshcha, and his son Tuval Cain used to lead him, right? He was his walking stick. V'ra'as Cain, and one day, Tuval Cain saw Cain in a distance. V'nidma lo kachaya. Why was Cain looking like a chaya in the eyes of Tuval Cain? Because he had a horn, right? Remember that? V'yamer la'aviv limshoch b'keshet v'hargo. He said, hey, Dad, I see an animal in the distance. Let's kill him. So he obviously couldn't shoot a bow and arrow, so he needed the help of Tuval Cain. Okay, this is literally lifnei eiver. Okay, so he tells his father where to shoot, and he killed Cain. The kiven sheyada shehu Cain zekeno. When Lamech realized that he killed Cain, his great grandfather, hika kaf el kaf, he hit his hands together, the safak es beno beinehim v'hargo, and his son Tuval Cain happened to be between his hands, and he killed him too. So in one fell swoop, he killed his grandfather Cain and his son at the same time. Now we know why his wives weren't too proud of him. So Rashi ends off by saying, "V'hayunashav parshas mimenu v'hu mefaisa." So his wives didn't want to sleep with him anymore, So Lemech came up with this nice poem of saying, listen, I didn't do it on purpose, right? Ish harakti lepitzi, I killed a person for wounding me, and a youngster for literally bruising me. Okay, so that's what Rashi says. There's a fascinating Ramban that I have to read. The Ramban says, okay, you ready for this? What's going on over here? He says the Ramban, the Nira be'enai, ki haya lemech ish chacham ma'od b'chol melechet machshevet. Okay, Lemech he wasn't a lamech. He was a very, very smart person. Okay? V'limed libno habachar inyan hamire. I didn't go into the whole discussion, but he had 3 sons. He had Yaval and Yuval, right? You remember? So he taught one son, right? How to deal with, how to be a shepherd. Right? He brought music into the world, believe it or not. We'll talk about that one day. And the third son, he bought into the industry of iron and steel production and weaponry. And his wives, what were his wives, Ada and Sila, really worried about? They were scared, shloya enash, that Lemech not be punished, because, right, you could make weapons with the steel and with the iron that you could create, right? You could create good things, right, from steel and iron. You could also create bad things. You could create weapons. So they were worried, the wives were, that through his creation, he was going to bring ritzicha, destruction and devastation to the world. V'hinehu tofes ma'aseh avosav biyado, kihu ben hamirtzach harishon. And the problem is, Lemech had very bad yichus. He came from Cain, who was the very first, right, who was the first murderer that the world had. Ubara mashches lachavel. V'hu amar lehen, he said to them, hey, calm down, wives. Ani lo haragti ish lepetzaim, v'lo yelod lechaboros, kasher asa Cain. No. I'm not like Cain. I didn't kill anybody willingly, like Cain did. V'lo ya'anisheni, Hashem. God's not going to punish me. He's gonna do the opposite. He's gonna guard me, right? He's gonna protect me. The Hisker Ken Lomar, why? Kilo b'cherev v'chanit yachol adam laharug b'ptzayim v'chaburos. Shiyamis b'misa ra'ayosim in acherev. Ve'in acherev gorem haritzicha ve'en ala osachet. Right? You wouldn't believe that the Ramban said these words. These are the words that come after every school shooting debate. Is do guns kill people or do people kill people? Says the Ramban, this is exactly the claim of Lemech. Again, look at the words. He says, Kilo b'cherev v'chanis yachol adam laharog b'ptzayim. He says, what do you want from me? He says, I didn't kill anyone. He said, the weapons killed, right? That man, right? You could kill with a sword, but you could also kill, like my grandfather Cain caused, right, with bruises. And that's worse than any strike by the sword. So therefore, the sword isn't the cause of the murder, right? It's the person, right? So therefore, there's no sin on me for creating the sword, right? This is, of course, the whole defense of right, all of the NRA, right? It's not the guns, right? This is the Second Amendment. You could have a whole class just on this one Ramban. And I saw that the Rabbeinu Bechaya also has a similar interpretation. He says, what is this little poem that Lemech is saying? Ki ish harakti lepitzi, o yelad lechaburasi, sha'ati bo kamosha sakai, not like kavanat loma ki adam yachol laharag below cheretz. He says, what do you want from the gun manufacturer? What do you want from the fact that I bought guns, that I bought weapons into the world, right? you could kill without a cherev. Just look at Cain. He killed with his bare hands. The ein hacherev sibat haretzicha. The cherev is not the cause of the murder. Even though he fabricated the weapons, though, ein alav onesh bazeh. You can't pin him to the crime. Because you could, at the end of the day, kill with your hands and not necessarily, right? And there's an interesting, the Gemara in Avodah Zarah, just read you one line on Daf Tezvav, talks about, are you allowed to sell weapons to Jews and to non-Jews? The Gemara says on Tezvav Amud Beis in Avodah Zarah, ein mochen lahem lo zayin v'lo klei zayin ve'ein mashchizin lahen, right? You can't sell them weapons, and you can't sharpen their swords, and you can't sell them chains and any, army, warfare, anything. Echad avod kochav and ve'echad kusi. And Tosfos over there on the side mentions that the reason is because, qualifies it by saying it applies to someone who's a chashud. Okay, and that's exactly what we discussed today about, it doesn't mean that you just can't sell something to someone that can be used, right, for a bad purpose. It's only if the person is a chashud. And that's, Tosfos on the bottom over here has a whole discussion about that. He says, Aval hacha mayer b'Yisrael hachashud anu muzharin shelo yavo shum Yisrael lidei takala al yadenu. I can't cause someone else to sin with the sword that I provide to him if I think that he's violent. Obviously, this is the whole discussion about enabling and are you an accomplice, and if you don't know, this is just a tiny little bit, but this really, if you want to look at it more, so you should know this is the source. And I found it fascinating how the lifnei eiver, right, tied into this discussion, because Lamech was literally eiver, and his son, right, led him, and so that's one instance of lifnei eiver, and it grew into the bigger discussion that the Ramban and the Rabbeinu Bachaya brought down, not just the fact that he was literally blind, but how much responsibility do you bring on this enabler for letting someone do something if, after all, you could kill someone with a sword just as easily as kill someone with your hands. I wanted to end off, we have 2 more minutes. While I was researching this, I saw a very, very humorous Medrash Tanchuma. Usually you don't think about Midrashim as being humorous, but I just wanted to read this because there's something really, really cool about this Medrash, and I think you'll agree with me. This goes back to the story of Lamech, okay? The Medrash Tanchuma says the following, Kivan Shabbat Ulabayit. Upon returning home, Amar Lehen Lamech Lanashav, Alo Lamita. First of all, just look at the words. He told his wives, and I'm just reading it the way it is. Come to bed with me. Amrulo. So they said, hey, Lamech, haraktes kain zakenenu v'tuval kain benenu. You want me to sleep with you? Said Lamech's wives. You killed Grandpa Cain and our son Tuval Cain on the same day. We're not sleeping with you. Amar Lehen, he told them, Kvar nato chelko Cain shiva doros aval ani shivim v'shiva. He says, Cain received his punishment after 7 generations. And he did it on purpose. I'll get my punishment, but maybe after 77. It'll be postponed for 77 generations. Don't worry about it. That still didn't work. Amrulo, the wife said, Lo nishmalach, we're not going to listen to you. Ma anu molidos l'me'era. Why should we give birth to someone who's going to be dishonored? Amar Lahen, so now he's got to fight with his wives. So how does he resolve it? He goes to court. Amar Lahen, nelech lebezdin, let's go to court. So who was presiding that day in court? Halchu lahen etzel Adam Harishon. Adam Harishon was the judge. Amrlu Ada v'tzila. So Ada and Tzila start off by saying, Adonenu, Adam Harishon, Lemech ze ba'aleinu harig zakenenu. Lemech killed our Zaidi, Cain. Amar lahen, Adam said, Izakenenu lefi tumo hargo. So they went to court to Adam, right? And Lamech said, did our grandfather Cain kill unwittingly? Right? No, he did it on purpose. Right? So he told him, so he said, Adam, right? My wives, listen to me. Lemech says, Ki ish haragti lefitzi, bitmia, right? So Adam replied, Ada and Sila. And Lemech says, have I killed intentionally? Basically, if you did it if you did it by accident, as opposed to Cain, you should be let off the hook. So that's what Adam told the wives. Amar lehen, right? L'chu hishmanu l'balechem. I'm sorry, Adam says, you lost the case. He killed Tubal Cain and Cain by accident. Go listen to your husband. Amrulo, this is a very cute punchline, that's why I'm bringing it. Asya, aseh chigartach. So they give Adam a little bit of a taste of his own medicine. So the wives of Lamech say, hey, Adam, doctor, you should heal your own machla. Meaning, Ata perasha mimitascha me'ushloshim shana. You haven't slept with your wife for 130 years. The Ata melamed osanu, you're telling us to go jump in bed, right, with Lamech now? You haven't slept with your wife in 130 years. Maksiv achrav, what does it say after that? Vayechi, what's the next pasuk? Vayechi gadam shloshim shana, vayoled b'dmuso kitzalmo. Right? Right after this story, Adam says, you know what? I can't tell them to go sleep with her husband if I haven't slept with my wife in 130 years. So the end of the story is Adam goes and he has a baby right after the story. I think there's a lot of humor in this. What this means, I don't know. I don't think any of us ever heard of this medrash before. That's why I wanted to end with this. A very cute medrash. There's some cynicism. There's definitely some humor. And again, it's all tied to, how much we, how much cause do we have with this lifnei eiver. So I wanted to end on that interesting medrash.